Welcome to Daily 5 for Thursday, May 11th, 2023. There was an article that apparently came out in a paywalled website called The Information. I don't know if it came out earlier this week or it might have been at some point last week, but essentially this is very common in almost every sector, but technology is one that typically gets a lot of press about it because it's a lot of, just glitz and glamour on the inner workings of these giant multi-billion dollar companies. And there were some people who had left Apple, and I don't know if everybody interviewed in the piece had gone to Google, but many of them had gone over to Google to work on some of their Google's AI initiatives. And they were essentially, and this is very common with this type of thing, as with most places, when somebody leaves a company, they tend to, many of them tend to have things, they focus on the negative things that were at the company they left, as opposed to saying wonderful things about them, unless they're retiring or getting a huge payout. And then they tend to be very, very nice towards the company that gave them a bunch of money. But when people leave and go to another company, very often what you get are these stories, these sour grape stories, as they're sometimes portrayed, or legitimate grievance type of stories. Again, it's all in the interpretation of what's being said and the perspective of the person saying it. But a lot of people were focusing on the fact that it was making Apple out to be behind the curve on, the whole large language model thing and what people are terming as AI. And, that was going to mean that they were going to have a problem because all these other companies are racing ahead, which of course, nobody knows that. Nobody has any idea. Apple often comes to a market late, and most of the time when they arrive there, they somehow manage to dominate it, even though a lot of people will be like, oh, you're late to get here. Well, that's because they sat back, observed the problems, fixed the problems, and then arrived with something that's generally superior in a pretty locked-in ecosystem. Apple kind of knows what they're doing. So what was interesting, though, is because, again, with these types of stories, when you have ex-employees that are speaking, often under the guise of anonymity or, from a position where they had left a company they weren't happy with. And, of course, the company has its own story on that. A lot of times people interpret these as just people that are venting and people are just complaining and want to throw their old company under the bus. And the reality is, if you weren't at the company, if you didn't know exactly what was going on, you really don't know what the actual story is. So there could be, and often I'm sure is, some embellishment of the actual facts. But generally, a lot of people write these off as stories that are just people who are upset because they didn't get their way at a company and they're just whining about it later. The thing about these stories in terms of Apple and its apparently conservative approach to large language model type of systems is it does dovetail really well in how bad Siri is. And honestly, she seems to have gotten somewhat worse over the last 6 to 12 months. I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but and I talked about the fact that I left the Echo ecosystem, Amazon system, to go over to the HomePod and the Siri system, and I don't regret that move at all, because the real reason I left Amazon was not only because the Echo, and we can see they're shutting down a lot of these divisions, the Echo product itself was degrading, the Alexa software was getting worse, but also because I just think Amazon is extraordinarily predatory and is becoming a more and more desperately predatory company. I think it's hard to miss the fact that they are now hawking more and more junk on their site. And apparently the Alexa product has gotten really miserable in terms of what it's trying to do and to make you buy things and sell things. I wouldn't know. I've been out of that ecosystem for a while now. But it is pretty easy also to see that Siri is not that great. She really isn't. She doesn't understand a lot of simple things. Commands that may have worked a month ago suddenly don't work anymore. Now, it's easy to get around a lot of that through automations where you build in your own key commands to make her do certain things. But it really is... This is a glaringly bad aspect of Apple, one that is really kind of astonishing that it's been like this so long. Siri feels like a beta product that they launched maybe a year ago because they felt desperate that they had to have something in the market. But the reality is this thing has been around for a long time and it just has not gotten all that much better. And again, depending on your experience, may actually be worse, but certainly is not anywhere near as advanced at this point, or at least better than you would expect it to be. So I have no trouble believing these stories that Apple, probably in the name of privacy, probably because they don't want to make a public mistake with this stuff. I kind of understand that, but at the same time, at some point, these interaction systems are going to have to get better, right? I'm actually curious. I would ask any of you listening, if you use Siri actively, have you found that she's gotten any better in your entire time using her? Because it certainly hasn't gotten better for me, but I'd be curious what anybody else thinks. So let me know later.